Remco Evenepoel with 29 kilometers remaining, and that is a ferocious, vicious acceleration.
I've been showing the best Remco since turning pro, so I'm really proud and happy to win this race.
Annemiek van Vleut, the Movistar rider, takes an impressive victory.
Heartbreak for Thibaut Pinot, who finishes second. This is your day, this is your moment, Thibaut Pinot.
You won! She won!
On this week's racing news show, triumph and tragedy for Quickstep Alpha Vinyl at Liege-Bastogne-Liege. I'll be looking at how Remco Evenepoel won the race in astonishing style and give an update on Alaphilippe's injuries. I'll also be looking at a thrilling edition of the women's race, plus La Flèche Wallonne, the Tour of the Alps, and another young superstar who's been snapped up by a world team on a long-term contract. I will start, though, with the men's Liege-Bastogne-Liege, the oldest of the classics, which this year celebrated its 130th anniversary, having first taken place in 1892. Now, a touchscreen analysis of what happened yesterday isn't really necessary. It is not hard to pinpoint how the race was won. It was basically done and dusted with this attack over the top of La Redoute.
Here he goes, near the top. Remco Evenepoel with 29 kilometers remaining, and that is a ferocious, vicious acceleration.
Almost every single rider and cycling fan in the world could have predicted that Evenepoel would make a bold move reasonably early, but despite that, there was nothing anybody could do about it. An initial acceleration so fierce his rear wheel lost traction, and acceleration so long that eventually nobody could hold on to his wheel. And that was the end of that. More often than not, on that type of terrain, give Evenepoel a metre and you give him the win. He sailed straight up to the last remaining rider from the early breakaway, Bruno Armirail, dropped him on the final climb of the day, and then cruised into Liège to take his biggest ever career win. At just 22 years old, he is the 5th youngest rider to win a monument since World War II, and the youngest winner of any monument since 1969. And you have to take your hat off to him. Every rider dreams of attacking solo on La Redoute and holding it to the line, but very few can turn that into reality. Liege-Bastogne-Liege did it in 2020, but on the men's side, I can't remember the last time that happened. One of you probably will, or maybe more. Let us know in the comment section down below. Behind him, despite a flurry of attacks over the Rochelle-Faucon and the uncategorised climb that followed that, they never managed to close the gap, and it became apparent that they were fighting for second place. Evenepoel was able to start celebrating with 2.7 kilometres still to go, and to make his ride even more impressive, yesterday was the second fastest Liege-Bastogne-Liege in its long history. Only 1963 has been faster. In the group sprint behind him, seemingly coming from nowhere, was Quentin Hermans of Intermarché-Wanty-Gobert, who picked Wout van Aert and Danny Martinez to the line. So whilst it's been 11 years since the Belgian won Liege-Bastogne-Liege, and they've only won it once this century, yesterday they dominated. They filled all 3 steps of the podium, something which hasn't happened since 1976. And for Intermarché, that marked their first ever podium placing at a monument, and it wraps up what's been a very impressive spring campaign for them. Van Aert, meanwhile, is the first rider to finish on the podium of Roubaix and Liège in the same year since Mathieu's dad. Adrie van der Poel did it back in 1986. Now, despite an enforced break from competition due to COVID, Van Aert's consistency has been incredible this season, even by his own lofty standards. Liège was his 14th day of competition this year, but also marked his 10th podium placing. A true giant of the cycling world, as proven not just by his results, but by this picture from the podium, in which he looks like he's gate-crashed a kids' race. Now, I think the most disappointed team from yesterday are going to be Bahrain victorious. They had the strongest lineup of any team. They were in complete control of the race, and if we look at this freeze frame from just after the Evenepoel attack, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 riders in that lead group. Maybe they couldn't respond, or maybe they just weren't alert enough, but either way, coming away with 6th place is going to be a massive disappointment for them. For a couple of other notable riders, it was their final participation at the race. Philippe Gilbert grew up at the foot of La Redoute and will finish his career having competed at the race a whopping 17 times, which is a record. It wasn't a fairy tale ending for him, and nor was it for 4-time winner Alejandro Valverde, although he did fare slightly better, taking his 9th top 10 placing at the race. Man of the match from a gutsy point of view had to be Groupama's Bruno Armirail. Although caught and dropped by Evenepoel, the Frenchman managed to cross the line in a very creditable 16th position. Now, before Evenepoel was almost single-handedly saving Quickstep's classic season, things looked like they were going to go from bad to worse for them. Julian Alaphilippe was amongst a huge number of riders involved in a high-speed crash coming towards one of the key climbs, and the world champion was visibly in a very bad way. So much so that Romain Bardet threw away any of his own ambitions in order to climb down the banking to assist his compatriot and friend. Chapeau, Romain. Now, a team press release last night confirmed that Alaphilippe was conscious, but the list of injuries is extensive. 2 broken ribs, a broken scapula and a collapsed lung. We wish you all the best in your recovery, Julian, as we do with everyone who got injured yesterday. Ilan van Wilder, also of Quickstep, suffered a broken jaw in that same crash, whilst Odd Christian Eiking fractured his wrist and elbow. Larry Warbasse was another rider involved, and it looks as though his injuries will mean he cannot take part in the Tour de Romandie this week. On to the women's race, and thankfully there was no mass pile-up there, but there was a massive attack. More than one, in fact, from the same person. Annemiek van Vleuten made her first move on La Redoute, catching and dropping everyone from the breakaway, except for Marlon Rooster of SD Works. She, rightly, didn't collaborate much with Van Vleuten, and so they were caught ahead of the final climb of the day. And it was there that Van Vleuten really showed how much stronger she was than anyone else on the day. Despite having used a lot of energy already, she had enough left to leave everybody behind on the Rochefort-Foucauld. And like Evenepoel later in the day, once she was solo, it was always going to be very hard for the chasers to get back on terms. In 6 participations at the race, she's only finished outside the top 6 on 1 occasion, and she is now the oldest ever winner of a monument on either the men's or women's side, just 6 months short of her 40th birthday. Now, like Van Aert, her consistency this season has been nothing short of remarkable. 11 race days, 4 wins, 7 podium placings, and never outside the top 4 in the World Tour races that she started. Her focus now shifts to the Giro d'Onnée and the Tour de France Femme, where she'll be looking to add to her 89 career wins so far. Behind her, Grace Brown continued FDJ's brilliant spring campaign by sprinting to second ahead of last year's winner Demi Vollering. Earlier on in the week, Flèche Wallonne threw up a couple of surprises. The women's race split up a lot more than the men's, with a reasonably small group arriving at the foot of the Muur de Huy to contest the win. Van Vleuten employed her usual tactic of just riding as hard as she possibly could, hoping to distance everybody. And she did. Everyone, that is, except for Marta Cavalli, who confirmed that her win in Alps was no fluke by taking a second big win at La Flèche Wallonne. Now, I've got to say that I found her patience in that race just as impressive as her strength. She stayed cool and played the waiting game when many others would have got very excited too soon. In the men's, not a lot happened until the final 3 minutes of the race. Many eyes were on Tadej Pogacar, but he just didn't have the legs. Alejandro Valverde did, although they weren't quite as good as those of Dylan Teuns, who became the first Belgian winner of the race since Philippe Gilbert in 2011. Second place for Valverde, just short of his 42nd birthday though, was his 9th time on the podium of that particular race. On to the Tour of the Alps, where a couple of riders would wind back the clock, much to the delight of almost every single bike racing fan out there. Before I get onto that though, a roundup of the first few stages. Geoffrey Bouchard survived from the early break to take his first ever pro victory on the opening day, but he relinquished the leader's jersey the following day to Pello Bilbao, whose sprinting seems to have gone up a level this season. Leonard Kemner of Bora Hansgrohe gave them a much-needed victory by winning from the break on stage 3. That man must have a blooming good strike rate when it comes to winning from a breakaway. On to stage 4, and it was Miguel Angel Lopez who broke the heart of Thibaut Pinot and many people watching the race. The Frenchman was the last surviving rider from the early breakaway, but he was caught agonisingly close to the line by Lopez, almost in tears actually after the race, but undeterred, he then went on the attack the day after and won his first win in 2.5 years. Happy days. Meanwhile, behind him, the race for the GC was on, and in grim conditions, it was Romain Bardet and Team DSM who came out on top. They managed to distance race leader Bilbao, with Bardet taking just his second GC career win, 9 years after his first. That incidentally was the Tour de l'Ain in 2013, which was his first ever career victory. Former teammate Michael Storer took second overall, now running for Groupama, with current teammate Thymen Arensman in third. Right, on to what's coming up on GCN Plus this week, and it is mainly about the Tour de Romandie. Historically a race used by many to warm up for the Giro d'Italia, and although that isn't really the case anymore, it does still attract some of the really big names of cycling. Last year's overall winner, Geraint Thomas, is back with a very strong Ineos team, whilst Thibaut Pinot will be looking to use the form that saw him take that fantastic win at the Tour of the Alps on Friday to good effect at this race. Other big names to watch out for on the GC include O'Connor, Haig, Uran, Woods, Igita, Maida and McNulty, whilst Gaviria and Hayter will be amongst those looking to win on the few flat stages that may end up in some sort of sprint. Cavagna and Dennis, meanwhile, will have their eyes set on the time trials, of which there are 2 across the 6 days. The race will be live every day on GCN Plus, and it's available to watch if you're in Europe, the US, Canada, plus the Asia Pacific, except for China and New Zealand. Matt Stevens and Nico Roach will be on comms. Also on this week, starting on Friday, is the 3-day Serra Tizit Festival LC Jacobs, which is available in all GCN Plus territories. Mormon Passio, Vandenbroek Black and Bastianelli are amongst those on the provisional start list. That race kicks off with a very short 2.2k prologue on Friday. Now, there is a one-day race for you this coming Sunday, May the 1st, in the form of the Eschborn-Frankfurt. Traditionally a sprinters race, it sees the return to competition of the Eritrean superstar, Biniam Girmay. He has now started to build up towards the Giro d'Italia. Bennett, Nizzolo and Philipsen will start as the big-name sprinters there, though. And that is not all. We've also got daily highlights of the new Tour of Hellas from Greece starting on Wednesday. But before I move on, I'm going to remind you all now that the first Grand Tour of the season is now just 11 days away. Can you believe it? The Giro d'Italia starts in Hungary a week on Friday. Now, we very much look forward to bringing you all of the action. Rob Hatch, Sean Kelly, Robin McEwen, Orla Chenery, Adam Blythe and I will be commentating, presenting and punditing, if that's a word, throughout the 3 weeks, which promises to be as thrilling and exciting as ever. We will have our big GCN preview show out for you next week, plus there's going to be loads of free-to-read content coming out on the app. I cannot wait. Bring it on. Now, in other news, Jumbo-Visma have signed 18-year-old Per Strand Hagenes on a long-term deal that will see him stay with the team until at least the end of 2026. Hagenes became the first Norwegian to win the Junior Men's World Road Championships last September. He's been riding for the Jumbo's development team since, and that is where he will remain until the end of next year, making the move to the elite team at the start of 2024. Lotto Soudal, meanwhile, have been signing up riders at the other end of their careers. South African Reinhard Janssen van Rensburg has been without a pro contract since the demise of the Quebecer Next Hash team, and he'll be joined by another former Quebecer rider, Carlos Barbero, from May the 1st at the Belgian squad. Tim Malier's participation at the Giro d'Italia is in doubt after badly injuring his elbow in a crash in Paris-Roubaix. Van der Poel is racing the Giro for the first time this year and would have been one of the key lead-out men for Malier on the flatter stages. And finally, some positive news on Milan Vader, who was involved in a nasty crash at the Tour of the Basque Country a couple of weeks back. He is awake, having been brought out of an induced coma, and all being well, he will travel home to the Netherlands this week. Again, we wish him all the best in his continued recovery. That is all for this week's Racing News Show. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be back same time, same place next week for the next show. Goodbye for now.